Have you ever felt that chill? That prickle in the back of your neck that tells you something isn't right? Welcome, friends, to Into the Spiderweb, where we delve into the unsettling, the unexplained, and the truly terrifying corners of our world. Here we explore the stories that linger in the shadows, and the whispers that make your skin crawl, and the encounters that defy logic. Tonight, we're drawing back the veil and stepping into the unknown. Are you brave enough to join us? We're going to begin with a story that reminds us that sometimes the most unsettling encounters are the ones that happen in broad daylight. This first story is about a man at the door with possibly less than innocent intentions. The story still leaves this listener with questions.
Why was he there? When I was about 8, I was watching Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I distinctly remember it because I was at the scene where he's talking to Tom Riddle in the chamber anyways. At some point, I heard the doorbell ring downstairs, so I went down and looked at the window facing the door as I was taught to do. A man who I'd never seen before was there, and he gave me a smile and wave. Something inside me did not feel right, so I went over to my grandmother, who lived with us at the time. I told her there was a man at the door, and I had no idea who it was. She immediately got up and asked him through the door what he was there for. She'd been robbed at gunpoint in the past. She didn't play games. He said he was there to tour the house since he saw that it was for sale. He said he saw the sign. There was no for sale sign in front of our house. The only time our house had been for sale was when we bought it 2 years prior to this, when we had it on the market for maybe 3 months. He was insistent that he saw it was for sale and wanted to see inside. He didn't sound angry or confused. He sounded confident in his intention. If anything, you would think my grandmother was the one who didn't know what she was talking about. They went back and forth for a minute or so. My grandmother stood her ground and at one point said, still through the door, that she had no idea what he was talking about, and if he didn't leave, she was going to call the police. He immediately left quickly, got in his truck and left. She let my parents know what had happened when they got back from work, and they were fairly alarmed as they did not recognize his description, and again, the house was not for sale. I was very young at the time, but the whole encounter just did not sit right with me. Something about how he smiled and waved like he knew me just rubbed me like sandpaper. To this day, I really hate to say it, but I don't think that man had innocent intentions. I don't want to know what would have happened if we opened that door.
Next, we dive into a story that shows the chilling reality of stalking. It begins with what could be a coincidence, but quickly escalates into something far more sinister. This story comes from the perspective of a young girl and is something ripped from a parent's worst nightmare, a terrifying glimpse into a family's true horror.
My mom had a stalker. I happened upon this subreddit by chance. I only use my account for home electrical advice, lol, but I guess I'll add my own true tale from many years ago. Almost all of this I was unaware of at the time and only found out the context of my memories years later from my parents. In about 1986, I was about 5. My dad's job moved us from Brooklyn to a bit upstate, and we bought a house in Connecticut. It was quite a change in lifestyle, from a crazy crowded neighborhood to 3 or 4 acres on a windy road in the woods. My mom especially loved it, the scenery and the quiet. It should be pointed out that my mom was about 27 or so at the time. My dad was about 30. All was fine for a while until my mom grew increasingly uneasy about a man she said she was seeing everywhere she went. When she went to the supermarket, he was there and would smile at her. She took my sister and I to the park one day, and he was sitting on a bench staring at her. There were many more instances, and at some point my mom mentioned it to my dad, who I think kind of wrote it off at the time. He had never seen the guy and figured it was just a coincidence. The town wasn't terribly big. You were bound to run into people over and over, but my mom was adamant, and it began to get more frequent over the course of about a month or so. I can almost recall her always being on edge when we went places. Finally, after one such incident, she called my dad at work crying and said that she was sure now that he was watching her daily movements. She said she was leaving to pick my sister up from the nursery school when she noticed a car through the trees on the road about 50 yards up from our driveway. When she got in the car, the other car pulled out and began to follow her. With increasing worry, she drove to get my sister and went in the school. When she came out, she saw the guy, who she said appeared to be her age, with sunglasses on, standing by his car looking at her. She had had enough at this point, and her Brooklyn kicked in as she started yelling all manner of crap at the guy, who promptly jumped in his car and sped off. This was enough for my dad now, who came home from work and promptly called the police. I remember they came to the house and spoke to my parents in the other room. Well, as luck would have it, the police knew exactly who the guy was, as he had been on their radar for a similar incident a few years before with another woman. However, they described him as sort of simple-minded and harmless, and had never threatened anyone or done anything violent. He was just a bit of a weirdo who couldn't take the hint. In what was a stunning display of small-town police ineptitude and sort of stupidity on the part of my father to allow it, the cops said they would speak to the guy and his parents, whom he lived with, and basically tell him to knock it off again. And so they did. And that very night, my parents received a phone call from this guy's parents, who apologized profusely and explained their son was a little socially off and never meant to hurt or scare anyone. They basically said that they told him to leave my mom alone, or they would get the police involved themselves. And in true naive small-town fashion, everyone just sort of shook hands and let it go. For a year, maybe more, there was no more sightings of him, no incidents. My dad knew where he lived now and occasionally would pass by to see if his car was at his house. I suppose it seemed that the gentle admonishment worked. However, that all changed one summer night in 1987. This part I remember well. It was about 9 p.m. and I was in bed, not yet asleep, and I could hear my parents watching TV in the living room. At some point, I heard my sister leave her room and walk down the hall towards the den. Suddenly, there was a commotion and an air of panic. It appeared that my sister was having an asthma attack and was really struggling to breathe. This would be the first of many attacks that had her on an inhaler into adulthood. My dad was running one way, my mom another. I heard the shower come on in an attempt to see if the steam would open up her airways. I remember my mom starting to shout that it wasn't working and to call 911. At this point, I got up and stood in the hallway watching this unfold. I remember my dad yelling that he had called 911 and that they were on the way. My mom was still in the bathroom trying to get my sister to breathe steam. I'll never forget what happened next. I walked down the hallway towards the den and the staircase that led to the front door. Side note, it was a split-level ranch-type house built into the side of a hill, so you had to walk down a flight to get to the front door. I think I was hoping to find my dad, who was probably in the kitchen where the phone was, as I was starting to panic a bit over the situation. However, he ran past me towards the bathroom where my mom and sister were. Suddenly, at the bottom of the steps, stood a young man staring up at me. The front door opened wide behind him. I yelled to my parents that the police were here, and I heard footsteps coming running down the hallway towards me. It had only been maybe 1 minute since my dad had said he'd called 911. I can recall thinking, even at 6 years old or so, wow, they get here fast. My mom came up behind me and proceeded to let out the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard. It was the freaking stalker standing there looking up at us. I hadn't recognized him, so I was now thoroughly confused as to what was going on. My dad was about 3 seconds behind that scream, and when he got there, my mom screamed, "It's him! It's that freaking guy!" I will never forget the look of utter confusion on my dad's face as he had a daughter in the bathroom starving for air, and his wife suddenly in hysterics over a man standing in his doorway. Like, which freaking thing do you attend to first? Well, this dude took one look at my dad and bolted out the door into the dark. He started to follow, but I think quickly realized that he knew where the guy lived, and since it appeared he had run off, there was no immediate threat. He yelled at my mom to go into the kitchen and grabbed me in a state of blind panic and pulled me with her. About 2 minutes later, the cops arrived, and one of them was a guy present a year earlier after the initial encounters. My mom started screaming, "He's out there. He was watching us." The cops were completely confused now as well. This was supposed to be a medical emergency, but suddenly it was a home invasion. EMTs were quickly behind the cops and gave my sister a few shots of an inhaler, and she was breathing again. But now all attention was on the stalker, as it was clear that he had to have been spying on my parents through a window, and in his twisted mind thought he could save the day. The cops caught up with him running down the road and arrested him. He admitted under questioning that he had been going for drives at night for months now and watching my mom through the windows from the woods. He didn't really seem to understand what the big deal was. Long story, way too long. He pled guilty to trespassing and some sort of stalking-related crime and went to jail, though I'm not too sure for how long. I have often thought about going back up there to take a look at what records are available on the case. Nothing seems to exist online. According to my parents, the lack of any threats or actual violence sort of rendered the story not newsworthy. My mom was so freaked out that my dad put it in for a transfer and we were back in Brooklyn by the fall. Although it's taken over 35 years, my mom can now tell the story with a laugh, but I don't think she ever got over that night. We found out from old neighbors years later in the late 90s that the guy had been in a group home post-jail and died from a heart attack. That's my story. Pretty scary, all true.
Our final story tonight takes us into the realm of the unexplained. It is a terrifying experience that will leave you questioning what lurks in the shadows and if you can ever truly be alone. Tonight's last submission is from a student who shares a terrifying college encounter with the paranormal. A college horror story. This happened last year. Me and my friends had the bright idea to get messed up on a Wednesday, so we got some weed and beers. There's a railway near our dorms, and it was the place to go smoke and drink, etc. It was really cold, so two of my friends already had started drinking to warm themselves up. Just on the way there, I was having a weird feeling like I shouldn't be there. I disregarded the feeling to just me trying weed for the first time. We eventually got there, sat on the rocks that were there, and we started drinking and passing the joint around. After 10-ish minutes or so, I heard a twig snap. I asked my friends, but none of them heard it. My one friend, who was the closest to me, said, "You probably imagined it. When you get high, you get hella paranoid." I accepted it because I've heard it's normal. After a couple more minutes, I heard some shuffling in the bushes. Think of a small trail path and there being a circular area with big rocks and the rest of it being bushes and trees. If you looked at it from a bird's eye view, it would look like a tree. This time, me and two of my friends heard it. We looked at each other. One of my friends looked at the other four who were still talking and said, "Did you hear that?" Our oldest friend said, "Really, you too now? Nothing's there." The minute he said that, we heard a whisper say,
Are you sure?
in a raspy voice. It sounded how a woman who's been smoking for years and just woke up would sound. The way the voice sounded made it also impossible for someone to impersonate the voice, so we all knew it wasn't a college student. We were all frozen. Then we heard that same voice laugh. It wasn't a laugh that would be made from someone laughing at something funny, but it sounded sinister. Then we heard the bushes shuffle again, so we all booked it back to our dorms. I don't think any of us have ever ran so fast. Normally it would be a 5-minute walk, but we turned it into a 1-minute run. I really wish I could say this was it, but it wasn't. I always liked living off campus, but this was the one time where I really wished I lived on campus. At about 2 a.m., I had to go back to my place, so I got my stuff and started walking back. The bus was down that day, so I couldn't take it, and I had to walk 25 minutes to get to my place. The minute I left my friend's dorm, I had a bad feeling. I told myself it's fine, you're just being paranoid, plus someone had to have been playing a prank. After 5 minutes, I had a feeling that I was being followed. I looked behind me and didn't see anyone behind me. I looked behind me every 30 seconds, and each time there wasn't anything there. When there was 5 minutes left, I heard the same shuffling in the bushes, and I froze again and stared exactly where I had heard it. I stood there for at least a minute. The only reason I actually started moving again was because I heard the same laugh. I ran as fast as I could and made it to the apartment main office in less than a minute. There's always a cop in front of the office, and when he saw me, he looked really concerned and asked me what happened. I didn't want to tell him, but what choice did I have? I told him I heard some weird laughing in the bushes, and it scared the crap out of me. He asked me where. When I told him, he nodded and said, "You too, huh?" I asked him what he meant, and he said that 3 other people have told him about it, and no one could figure out what it was. He told me I should start taking the bus and come back to my place earlier. I said, "Yeah, I will," and walked off. Again, I wish I could tell you this is where it ended, but it didn't. When I got back, I took a shower and got in my bed and tried sleeping. When I fell asleep, I woke up and thought it was weird that I woke up from how tired I was. And when I checked the time, it said 4:36 a.m. This was even weirder because that meant I only slept for around 45 minutes. That's when I heard that same laughing again. I laid up and looked around, and when I looked straight, I saw the shadow of something. It didn't look human, but it didn't look like an animal either. It was on all fours, and what it said scared me to the point where I stopped sleeping in my apartment and pretty much moved into my friend's dorm. It said in that same voice,
"I know you're in there, Frank, and I know you're up."
and it laughed. That entire night, I just laid down, trying not to cry from fear. I didn't really have to worry about it for much longer though, because it was a week before finals week and I had gotten accepted to another school that I wanted to go to. I don't really ever tell the story because from the people I've told, they either thought I was joking or I wasn't fully sober. I know exactly what I heard that night and I know I wasn't hearing things. These stories remind us that there are things that exist beyond the ordinary, experiences that defy easy explanation. What did we just hear? What were their motives? Sometimes it is best if we never know. If you have your own chilling encounters, be sure to leave them in the comments. Thank you for joining me for another video on Into the Spiderweb. Until next time, stay safe and always trust your instincts.